Hello and welcome to episode 6 of series 2 of Lore Diver. This series is diving into the lore of the Arcane Age, and this episode is taking a look at the many survivor skates of A-maskar. Well, almost all of them. There's a couple that are actually going to be featured as episodes of their own in this series, so yeah, still a lot of those. Still definitely a many situation. Now, if you're fresh to this series, I fully encourage you to please check out the previous episodes to catch up on what's going on, and to check out the Arcane Age primer blog post, which is available if you're watching this on YouTube in the description below this video. Now, before we start, and if you haven't already yet, please like and subscribe. And if you dig what I'm doing, please consider supporting me through either Ko-fi or Patreon. Let's get to this. So tonight I'm looking at, as I said, the survivor states of A-maskar, and it's going to be a fairly short episode. I'm thinking maybe a half hour, 45 minutes tops, because they're pretty succinct, and a lot of them are actually survived into the modern day. So that actually saves a lot of time for doing this. Now, A-maskar is unique, and not only does it have survivor states after its fall in minus 2,488 DR, but some of them have actually canonically persisted, or have the potential to have persisted in one case, up into the modern day of the game. That makes these the oldest human cultures and civilizations on Faerun, if not on Toril in general. And I say that because we don't know what's going on in Os, Katashaka, Ankorome, all the other major continental bodies are undescribed, so we don't know what's there. So as it stands, though, this is the oldest human civilization on the planet. Now, we're talking close to 10,000 years of existence and cultural development. And for perspective, that's all of real-world recorded human history. And then tack on, a few thousand years to take us back into the pre-written language Neolithic era. That's the sort of operation that's going on for this. So it is. Some of these places are wildly old. Now, the first one we're going to talk about here is Akon-Imaskar, and this is up on the Rakati plateau area, which is also apparently a tiny secret nation I discovered as I was doing the research for this today, and also in part of the Chunfeng province of modern Shulong. And it has what's probably the worst series of decisions going into how this place went forwards. So, A-maskar, the A-maskar Empire falls apart. Everything goes sideways. The Raurin becomes a huge desert wasteland. Everything's awful. Head east up into the Kati province, and which was Rakati, all that sort of stuff is, and all of a sudden you find a whole bunch of A-maskar who are pretty insulated from all the events that are going on. As catastrophic as the end of A-maskar is described as being, they never actually got completely wiped out. The Mulan people and their Sumerian and Egyptian gods more or less just pushed west, and everybody who was east of the main capital was more or less left untouched. And this is one of those groups. And so in the year after the disaster, one of the surviving artificers, a fellow named Kujawa, decided that, hey, pardon me, I should have a shot at being an emperor. Pardon me again, sorry. Whew. And took one of the false A-maskarana, Donus' shroud, and claimed the Dragon Throne, which is a pretty epic name for something that is not mentioned anywhere else, unless you start digging deep into Kartur and all that sort of stuff, and declared himself emperor, and called his new realm Anakh-Imaskar. Now, for those of you who don't remember from last time, the false A-maskarana are basically super powerful magical artifacts. The only reason that they're considered to be false, as far as I can tell, is that they aren't as mind-bogglingly powerful as the true A-maskarana. It's sort of like having, I guess, a car that looks like it's all souped up for street racing, but it just looks that way, but it still operates entirely well as a regular car. That's the sort of feel that I get off these things. So, Kujawa, just, he's now the emperor. Everything's going good. Spreads out, and things are like he actually like lives for hundreds of years. So he's artificially extending his life, and finally, the Anakh-Imaskar spreads. They take over a bunch of areas. Then there's a volcano eruption that gets rid of some of their land. They start having to pull back because they're having other issues. And then finally, for reasons completely unexplained that I've been able to find, it's literally just mentioned, like, oh yeah, by the way, this happened. This is the end of them. Emperor Kujawa, after hundreds of years of life and ruling everything, and apparently not setting up any sort of replacement system for himself, decides to fight the immortal Nun Qiang in the form of a Tianlong dragon. So he decides to go toe-to-toe with a celestial dragon. No reason is given for this. There's no history, no run-up to it. It's just Anakh-Imaskar falls because this guy fights a dragon and loses badly. And then that's it. The place collapses. It turns into a bunch of little warring states, and is eventually absorbed partly into Rakati, becomes its own little tiny secret nation, and the rest is absorbed into Shulung. And for some reason, this is pointed at in the material as being, the earliest dynasty of the Shulung Empire, but there's no real dynasty. Like, he doesn't make a dynasty. He just sort of recreates Imaskar, but tiny, and then dies fighting a dragon. And so what year was it? I took my notes here. Yeah. In minus 1943 DR. So, I mean, he had a good run, like several hundred years of ruling before dragon-related death. And that was the end of Anakh-Imaskar. So, next up, Deep and High Imaskar. And I'm lumping these two together because I feel that they're better explained when they're put in together. So, Deep Imaskar is a 3rd edition entry into the game. Anakh-Imaskar is it appears in the 2nd edition. It's mentioned in 3rd edition, but it's sort of implied there's something going on there in 2nd edition. Deep Imaskar is definitely a 3rd edition entry into the world, and not really a lot is described about it. Like, it shows up in the Underdark book, and is mentioned in the Lost Empires, Forgotten Realms campaign guide, all that sort of thing. But it's just sort of like, oh, by the way, there's this place called Deep Imaskar, and I hear down there's some humans that have been living underground for millennia now. They're so strange and magical. And that's it. That's the end of it. So it's also Deep Imaskar is a single city known as the City of the Great Seal, and it was created about 7 years after the fall of Deep Imaskar. So that's minus 2481 DR by a wizard lord named Ifamon. And it was basically the Vault-Tec Fallout solution to the collapse of your civilization. They burrowed underneath the Endless Waste in the Underdark and set up a city. And it just existed like that. Necromancers ruled it for a long time. And of course the Deep Imaskari are from there. And the Deep Imaskari are probably one of the few instances in the game of a group of people living underground who actually start to look like they're living underground. Like, they go from having dark complexions, which is what they had on the surface, to really pallid and pasty pale, and they're influenced by all this magic and everything else like that. So it's really, really weird, and they're kind of creepy looking. And of course, like all other creatures that live underground, apparently they develop some really strange fashion sense. Don't know what's going on with that. Anyways, look up pictures of the Deep A-maskar if you want to see what I'm talking about. I think they're getting their like clothing tips from the drow or vice versa. Don't know. Anyways, so the City of the Seal, basically there's this giant seal that magically protected them. And they sort of like, they sneak people out every so often to see what's going on. And that was about it. It seemed like a really odd entry to me in 3rd edition. And then in 4th edition, everything kind of explodes. And that's where A-maskar comes into it. So Deep A-maskar is essentially a time capsule. Well, not a time capsule. It started out as a time capsule of A-maskar and has persisted into the modern day. It's still around. It's still there. And the only difference between it in the past and it right now is its population is smaller. It's a comment here. In the Underdark, purple never goes out of style. That is very true. Purple never goes out of style in the Underdark. I do not know why. Anyways, so A-maskar explodes onto the surface, literally. So 4th edition kicks off. You've got the whole spell plague. The world is radically different. Pardon me. All those changes go down. And A-maskar is one of the things that comes back. And A-maskar, they show up and basically set up shop back where old A-maskar's westernmost reaches were. So Mulhorand has fallen apart. So all of a sudden they come back. They've got like giant insects they use for flying around. They set up Skyclave, this giant magical empire, and they take over the place. And everybody was initially afraid, like, oh no, the A-maskari are back. It's our nightmares of old come to have horrible revenge on us. And then it didn't happen. Instead, they found themselves, or all the people that they conquered found themselves under the rule of an extremely enlightened and benevolent imperial system. And for 90 years, life was actually really good. They abolished slavery and freed all the slaves in Mulhorand and what was left of Unther. They established trade routes and generally did a lot of good things. And then, but the only thing that they did do that was, a bit of a dick move and kind of understandable given their history was they banned worship of the Mulhorandi pantheon. Not cool, but also a little understandable given the extremely bad blood these groups have. Anyways, so A-maskar was rocking and rolling and doing all of its things. And then all of a sudden, everything goes sideways. So in 1479, a blue dragon leads an army of dragon spawn against them. They get help from Time Anther, and that's good. But, there's they don't help them out with Jacinta, so there's some like political problems. And then finally, the Second Sundering happens. The Mulhorandi gods return to Faerun and incite a rebellion. And it's minus 2488 all over again. Except for things don't make as much sense anymore. And survivors are forced to flee into the plains of purple dust and into the other plains. So, to me, this was a very unsatisfactory ending to A-maskar. Largely because it was... and I'll get more into this into the my take on things part of this, but I felt that it was just sort of a really bad reset button to hit, and just sort of like reset everything back, and then they tried to salvage the things that had gone right there, like getting rid of slavery and all that sort of thing. Also, the way that the place was destroyed was pretty weak. It was not the best put together plot line. So its actual status right now, where Deep A-maskar is still existent. A-maskar's full status is unknown. All we really know is that their capital was destroyed. However, as I've said in previous videos, the destruction of a capital does not mean the end of an empire or a nation. Like if that was true when the British and Canadian irregulars burned parts of Washington and the White House down back in the War of 1812, that would have meant that America lost automatically, but it didn't. If we go further back in history, the many times that Paris was sacked or Rome was sacked, none of those things ended France or Proto-France. None of those events ended Rome. It sucked, but it didn't end them. So destroying a capital does not result in the destruction of a nation. So yeah, A-maskar, current status unknown. People fled into the plains of purple dust. Unlike the Rauran desert, the dust desert, the plains of purple dust are still inhabitable. And in fact, last time I read about them, it was full of ancient Imaskari ruins and stuff like that. And these were places where the Mulhorandi, with their extreme dislike of arcane magic and heavy use of divine magic, probably would have avoided, because they're designed to be anti-divine magic. So these are places that these fleeing people would probably be able to find refuge and be able to start to rebuild. So I hope that Wizards does something with this location, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, Deep Imaskar and A-maskar. Now, Semfar. Most people have probably not heard of Semfar, and that is entirely understandable. Or if they have heard of it, it's just been like a little side note or a barely labeled part of the map of Faerun. If you get the one that shows the utter east and the eastern shore, eastern shore of Bright Star Lake. And if you haven't seen that map, or if you haven't like literally dug through the books, you probably would not have found mention of this place. However, according to the one place it is written about, which is the old Horde Lands, like the Horde campaign box set, it is an incredibly powerful nation. And reading about it made me very frustrated that it is not better developed and better used as a springboard location. So it's on the eastern shore of Bright Star Lake, and this nation is the pivot point in many ways between Faerun and Karatur. It is literally like the Horde Lands and the Endless Waste are to the north. Bright Star Lake is to its west, and across that, I believe it's Murgholm. I think it's Murgholm across there. I'll have to check that. Anyways, so across the lake, you've got that. To the south, you've got the Rauran Dust Desert, and you've got... Oh, awesome. Someone checked it. Yep, nice. And, then you've got the mountains that separate Faerun from Karatur. This place it's an amazing central location, and it just sort of persisted. Like, it is a survivor state, but there's no description of like how it survived, just because it's mentioned only so briefly in a few places. We know that it was part of the A-maskar Empire. We know that they ruled there. Then Mulhoran had influence for a bit, and then the Shulung had influence for a bit, and then the Tujian had influence for a bit, and now they're on their own again, I think. Dwarves settled underneath it before anywhere else, and yeah, it's got like a lot of stuff going on, but there's no actual like solid written history about it at all. It's just described as being one of the most powerful and important places in that part of the world, and that like you have to thank you very much, Tallbearer7, for the contribution there. I did not notice that. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes, not looking at my my screen all the time here. Well, looking at it. Never mind. I'll carry on. So it is, there's like nothing on it. It's existed perpetually since A-maskar was a thing. It was founded at some point during A-maskar's rule and has existed the entire time since. Um, it was, as you can tell from the way I'm talking about it, it was a very confusing thing to discover and read about, and frustrating. Next up, Solon, down in the desert. So this is southish of Semfar. Solon had it rough. It is a great example of the Forgotten Realms' long history of denying heroic aid or assistance to the darker parts of the world. And Solon really stands out for that. It was a city that survived the fall of A-maskar. It was basically too far east for the Mulan to want to have to risk going through all the desert and all the weird magical fallout that was happening. And so it held out on its own. First it was a city-state, then it expanded, it had a little empire, and then, the usual things, get imperial decline, a series of bad kings, all that jazz. And eventually it sort of sucked back, and it was just the city. And that's where it was. That was the point it was at in just before 1360 DR, and this is when the Horde campaign book came out. And the Horde campaign book lets everybody know that not only has it been on hard times, but at this point it has now been conquered by a lich. So this lich, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce its name, it is some extruded fantasy nonsense. This lich shows up with an army from Drapar, conquers the place, and then sets about trying to attack other locations, and is unsuccessful in expanding their empire past the city of Solon. But they own the city of Solon, so that's good. And then let's see, question here, Horde equals Mongol land. Yes, the Horde, better described as the Tuigan or Tuigan, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, is the Mongol analog that TSR added in. It is, a whole lot of research gone wrong went into it. Very not quite as bad as Nazca, but pretty bad. Oh, got a comment here from Brian Cortillo. Tuigan. Okay, Tuigan. There we go. So the Tuigan. Anyways, so Solon is doing its thing, and the Lich gets bored and is like, you know what? I could keep attacking my neighbors, or, bear with me here, we could start digging up the city. I hear there's A-maskari stuff underneath here. And he turns A-maskar into the largest forced archaeological dig on the planet, I'm going to go with, because I don't think this has happened anywhere else. And he's basically forcing everybody to dig to look for A-maskari artifacts. And when they die, he just raises them up as undead and gets them to keep on digging. And this nightmare lasts for a few years before a volcano is magically induced to erupt and buries the city. And that occurs in 1360 DR. So they get a few years of absolute horror, and like digging constantly, trying to find A-maskari artifacts with this lich, and then buried Pompeii style by a volcano. So it does not make it into the modern day. However, it's several thousand years of existence. That's pretty impressive. Now, the last one, this is the possible survivor state that I was talking about. And that is Mitos / the Methwood. Now, why is it a possible survivor? It's confirmed to have been a place. It's known that refugees made it there before, and before some of them moved on. And Unther avoids the place like the plague. Now, to understand where I'm getting, this is sort of like reading between the lines. So the fortress, it was described first as an outpost, but other descriptions buff it up to being a full-on fortress. And this is an A-maskari fortress, so it is defended by portals and magic that warps time and space. So the actual dimensions of the fortress, it's like how big it is, how many people can house, everything else like that is completely a mystery. But again, as I said in the last episode about the A-maskar, if you just assume that all of their important buildings are TARDISes with other TARDISes inside of them, that is probably a good assumption to make. Now, Unther avoiding place. Why is this a key to me that this is a survivor state? Well, the Untherites are probably the most hateful group of Mulan. Like, where the Mulhorandi decided to, like the Egyptian-themed Mulan, called it a day and were happy with the extent of their revenge and everything else like that after they'd conquered what is now Mulhorand, more or less. The Untherites weren't. The Untherites pursued the A-maskar survivors and refugees and the Turami survivors and refugees for ages after the war was done, for revenge. Just to, like, kill them all, and hopefully let no one sort them out, sort of thing. And they are not noted for being afraid of anything. Like, they will go into battle against just about anything, horribly equipped, because, damn it, they're Untherites, and it's time to throw down. They do not go into the Methwood. They do not go near the Methmere, and the area is not particularly more monstered up than other places are. And that implies to me that there is something there that is actively wiping out any Untherites that get too close to it. And that sounds a lot to me like a population of A-maskar and Turami who persist in that location and who are essentially still fighting like a long insurgency and guerrilla war against the Untherites, who now more or less surround the area that they live in. And with the Fortress of Midos itself, with it being a like pan-dimensional operation, there's no telling how much space they have or how well they could expand or even what resources it was. So I put it under the possible survivor list, and I think that it would be a very good plot point or place to add in, just because, you know, who doesn't like that sort of like cool thing. Now, how would I approach A-maskar's survivor states? Okay, there is a lot to be done here. I'm gonna zip right through this here. So, Akon-Imaskar. I got a whole lot of nope going on for this one. Of all the survivor state entries, I feel that this one, I think that this one is the most problematic. Pardon me. And the reason for that is that it steals the agency and independence from the Asian-coded Karatur region. Like, Karatur is awesome. It has its own thing going on, and sort of slotting it in and saying that this is the foundational point from which the Shulong Empire will develop. I think that was kind of a weak developmental method to use. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of, you know, somebody using one of the false A-maskarana and trying to recreate A-maskar, like some artificer like Kujawa. That's fine. I love that concept. I would move its location somewhere else, and then keep the other main points of the story intact. Like, I maybe shift it up into the mountains over the Dust Desert or along the south or something like that, but just move it away from Karatur and break that link off. For like people who are playing in the modern game, I think that it is, like all these places, it's a great place to go and hunt for weird stuff and leftovers. Plus, there's a chance that the third A-maskarana artifact is still around there, and nobody knows what it does, or what any of them do for that matter. So this really opens up some options for everybody to do some stuff there and develop it a little bit before anything official is developed for it. Now, Deep A-maskar. Details. I want to know more. So we got a question here. What were the first two? Yeah, there's they don't give us anything on the A-maskarana. We don't know how many false A-maskar there are. We can assume that there's at least 3, but there's likely to be more. Hang on a moment here. I'll just go back through my notes. Here we go. So, yeah, there were 7 proper A-maskar made, and an unknown number of false ones. We know at least 3 were made, so what's going on with the other 2, and what's going on with those first 7? No idea. We know that I think the third A-maskar... Was it the third A-maskar? Was that the one they used for deep A-maskar? So, deep A-maskar was founded by someone who used the third A-maskar. Doesn't say what it is. No details. So yeah, it's don't know. Like, these could be anything. This is just a short segue I'll do right here on this. One of the themes that I've run into a lot in the Arcane Age research is that all of these ancient civilizations had a real thing for putting all of their arcane knowledge and like all of their power knowledge for things into objects and creating these immensely powerful artifacts. Like Netheril did it. Like Netheril had the Nether Scrolls, and then they started making their own stuff. Deep A-maskar did it. Jamdath, which I'll be going into next week, was doing like the same sort of thing but psychically. So like they were really into this, like the idea of preserving their knowledge in artifacts, but like what those artifacts are, where they are, and what abilities they have are really undescribed. In fact, only Netheril's is sort of described, and that's with the Nether Scrolls. And if you can get a hold of those things, anybody can read them. And if you read them, it gives you the ability to cast all the magic of like a particular school or a particularly powerful spell, like all that sort of stuff. Like within Forgotten Realms, that's explained as how gnomes got their magic. Like their illusion magic was one of them helped steal the Nether Scrolls and looked at one, and he's like, I know the entire illusion school of magic, and it's burned into my DNA now. All right. So, yeah, no idea what's going on with those A-maskar, and that's part of the details that I would like for Deep A-maskar. What are its interactions with the Underdark? I mean, yes, I know it was sealed away. Nobody can get in or out except for the scouts they deploy every so often. But once that seal was broken and once they started interacting with the world, what were their interactions with the Underdark? Did they run into Drow, Serve Neblin? Mind flayers? Like, what's going on under there? What are their interactions with the world? Or did they just like throw some Bondo on the seal, close it back up, and hope that everything would work out? Like, these are details I would like to know. I would also like to know. I would get into the details of how their culture developed, because you have a group of what were ostensibly elite A-maskari all going into this, a vault, for lack of a better term. Use some Fallout terminology. How'd their culture go? Like, I would want to dig into all of that sort of stuff, because it would just be wildly different than anything that's on the surface. And the final thing is, I would develop the schism. I would want to get into the details of why there was a sufficient number of them willing to leave and return to the surface to form High A-maskar. And so, like, what happened down there, and what are their thoughts on these High A-maskar? Now, which takes us over to High A-maskar. High A-maskar, things that I would do with it. Oh, I would do so many things with it. First and foremost, develop it. It was, owing to the brevity of 4th edition, High A-maskar was not as detailed as it could have been. And its ultimate fate, as I said, I feel was poorly hacked together. It's a whole lot of that, like, destroy the capital, collapse the everything, and that's not how stuff works. I would put them into the Plains of Purple Dust, and I would make them a nation. I would keep High A-maskar alive. I would say, yeah, High A-maskar is still a thing. They're there. They've still got their bugs. They're still doing their thing, and they are developing their civilization, right there on the plains of purple dust, and it is driving Malhorand crazy. There'd be a low-level conflict with Malhorand because Malhorand hates them, and they are just as happy to hate Malhorand back. Pardon me. I would have it as a place where people from Malhorand are escaping to, especially if they have any sort of arcane magic abilities or proclivities. So they'd be headed there to be able to basically live freely without risk of being. Yeah, actually, I think were they killing them still? Can't remember if they were still killing magic users there, but it's not a good place to be a magic user. The other thing that I would do is I would actually have a bit of fun with it, because like the A-maskari are still physiologically largely what they were underground, and that is not a good way to be when you are living on the surface. Like, you do not want to have pale, near translucent white skin when you were living in a warm, temperate area under the hot sun. And something that I might actually play, will be playing with in my games is I'm going to be slowly turning them purple. They are absorbing the purple dust of the place that they live, and that is becoming their new complexion. I think it's a bit of fun, keeps them distinctive, and why not? Oh, see, purple, never, yeah, there you go, purple, never out of style, never. Other stuff I would do with it, I would really just, I would get into the lore and ruins aspect of it. Like, a lot of the adventures in that place would be clearing out ruins, recovering artifacts, and doing things like that to try to bolster the overall stability and capability of A-maskar. I would also probably have them coming into contact with and doing things with Murgham to just, tick off Malhorand more, because Murgham is under control of all those dragons right now, and it is a dragonocracy, for lack of a better term, and that can't be going great for Malhorand. Malhorand's still upset about Thay, and that happened thousands of years ago. So that's the directions I would go with that. Now, Semfar, this place, like, everything about Semfar, it talks about how powerful it is, how important it is, how grand it is, and what an incredible crossroads of civilizations, cultures, and everything else the location is. And then it doesn't do anything with it. Like, it has less than a page in the box set for the Horde, and that is almost the sum of all the information available on it. It is tragic beyond comprehension. Okay, because reading this place, it sounds like it should be like Semfar should be the equivalent of the Sword Coast, but on the eastern side of Faerun. Okay, like, its capital city should be Waterdeep East. And I'm just gonna, what is the name of that capital city? Can I pronounce it? I can try. Let's see here, cities of town. Where did I put it? Okay. Daz-Tanar. Daz-Tanar? The Crystal Towered. So, yeah. Like, this way, it's at the end of the equivalent of the Silk Road for the Forgotten Realms. Like, this should be the Waterdeep of the East, of Faerun. Obviously not the East of the East. That's something over in Kartur. But, like, it needs to reflect the importance that's implied to it. See, my map ends the Dust Desert Boomy. Yeah, if you want to see it, you'll have to look up the map for the Horde lands. So the map that came with the box set of the Horde campaign, it's on that, and I believe it is on the 2nd edition Forgotten Realms map as well. I think it actually went out that far, and that one is from the Atlas of the Realms. It is a big blue and green map. It actually looks like a an old school map itself. And yes, if you, I'm just looking at my copy of it. Yes, if you look at the old second edition one, from the Atlas of the Realms, it has Semfar on it. It, in fact, has Ulgarth as well. It actually makes it all the way to the Outer East. Not all of the Outer East, but some of it. That's a story for another day, though. So, back on top with Semfar. It is, yeah, only described in any significance in the Horde campaign box set, which is problematic in of itself, for so many reasons. And instead of being awesome, it is just sort of meh, because the focus of that campaign box set was on the Mongol coded Tweegan people and not on Semfar. So Semfar gets a lot of mentions, same with Solon, as play as like important locations in the region, the people have conquered and everything else happened to, but it doesn't actually get into the nuts and bolts of the place. I think that given the way that Forgotten Realms has come together, it will be an amazing Central Asian coded power. I think it would do incredibly well in with that sort of general cultural coding. It has influences from all over the world on it. So, I mean, like, it's listed as, the Tweegan have been in charge. Malhorand had it for a little while. Then it was under the control of, Shulong for a bit. So, like, it has this really deep history. And all these influences are listed about it. Like, different groups came and left different aspects behind. Like, parts of their bureaucracy came from Shulung, parts of their military tactics and stuff like that came from the Tweegan. Like this, it's all these awesome things, and nothing's been done with it. I think it should be an alternate starting point for adventures. I think it would be a fantastic starting point for adventures that are going to be happening in that region, just because of the quantity of, you've got Bright Star Lake, which is one of the largest lakes in the game. Like it easily qualifies as a Great Lake. Like it is almost the size of the Alamber Sea. That's there. It's got the Great Wildwood is north of it. Then you've got the Endless Waste and the Horde Lands, Rauran Desert, mountains all over the place. It has all the places that you can go to adventure. It's supposed to be full of like bizarre monsters and strange ruins, which all like harks back to that A-maskar heritage. So all these things are things that I would develop and do more with, and try to bring to the fore to get my players interested in it, and just and I guess the benefit, of course, is benefit and downside is not a lot written about it, so it's wide open for you to develop. But on the flip side, like, you're doing all the heavy lifting for it. Now, finally, Solon. What would I do with Solon? Can we get some heroes involved? Okay, it's like if you're playing it historically, get some heroes involved. Maybe try to stop the Lich from taking over. Try to help the people escape. Do something. But assuming that you're playing in the modern day and the canon events have still occurred, I would bring up the fact that undead don't need air or light or anything else. They just need physical existence, and even that is only required for ones that you want to be able to have contact with things in the physical world. It is entirely possible that Solon is still active, and that under its volcanic blanket of ash, there is an undead army toiling away, searching for A-maskar and artifacts for a Lich overlord who is loving the fact that all the adventurers on the face of the planet think that he's dead right now. This makes it a fantastic potential campaign in of itself. Imagine a city. Now bury that city with volcanic ash. Ash hardens, whatever. Looks like it's pretty much done. The party arrives and they hear what sounds like tools underground. That's weird. Eventually, one of the players falls through a soft spot or something like that, or finds entrance into the top of an old tower. and they discover that Solon is still there. It's been chipped out methodically by an army, by the entire populace that have all been raised as various forms of undead. Yeah, purple worm. Yeah, come here, purple worm tunnel. Yeah, that's a great way to get people in there. But yeah, now there's this army of undead chipping away in the darkness, trying to find artifacts for their Lich Lord. And I mean, so you've got like tons of undead. You've got a giant injustice stun that needs to be fixed. There's a lich to fight, and not to mention like what's been found. Because much like every other major pre-modern civilization on Faerun, the A-maskar were not, subtle about their magical items. They weren't stingy with them either. Like, they were out there, and so who knows what they've dug up. It's even possible that they've gained access to portals, and players may be drawn into this when they encounter undead, hundreds of miles away, who come out of nowhere, attack or do something, then go back through a portal. So there's lots and lots of things that can still be done with Solon, most of which are a nightmare dungeon crawl through a dark, stifling, volcanic ash buried city, where your players will be fighting tunnel to tunnel, room to room, for the entire campaign. So if that's what they're down for, do it. If it's not what they're down for, maybe don't take them to Solon. It's up to you. So, final one is Mythos, the possibility, and I think I sort of covered that in its description. As I said, it's a possible location. We know the fortress is there. The fortress is probably still there. The main danger there, as with anywhere else, is the fact that magic's been turned on and off a few times since all of these things were made. And that means that they're probably a little bit buggy and a little bit dangerous and may not be going to all the places that you want them to go. So I think that at a bare minimum, even if you don't keep survivors there or anything else like that, just the Fortress of Mythos in the Methwood, which is still the most unfortunately named forest on the realms as far as I can tell. It is, if you've got players who love puzzles, this place would be just one giant spatial puzzle of them teleporting from point to point and trying to figure out what teleports lead you to where and how to get back and all that sort of stuff. And you could just turn it into a giant puzzle palace and just keep your players entirely happy with random encounters, cool A-maskar treasure, and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, that's the option for that, and that's where I would go, or what I would do with the various A-maskar survivor states. Now, there are two significant ones that I have not discussed here, and that is Unther, with its own little offshoot Chesenta, and Mulhoran. I've mentioned them a lot, and they are actually going to be getting their own separate episodes in this series because they existed during the Arcane Age. They were both founded in or about 2488 DR. So they're actually nations within the context of this series. So look out for those ones in future, and I'll go into their connections with the A-maskar and all that sort of stuff. Now, next episode in 2 weeks' time, if everything works out, please everything work out. Series 2, The Arcane Age, continues. The plan is to dive into the lore of the Jamdath Psyocracy. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Jamdath Psyocracy, they were the only psychic supernation of the era, and I'm pretty sure they creeped all their neighbors out because, wow, like they had some crazy stuff going on, like giant psychic navies and like crystal palace, the whole bit. It is wild, and there are very good reasons why in the modern day your character should never ever go swimming in Vilhan Reach. Just don't do it. Stay out of that water. Avoid it like the plague, and I will talk about why in the next episode, or possibly the episode after. We'll see. So thank you very much for listening. This has been Lord Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, or check me out as POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want to support this podcast, there's links to my coffee on my blog and in my social media. The music was produced by purple-planet.com. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.